Hello everyone! I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today I wanted to talk to y'all about the interesting trend of solitary survival stories in the 1990s. So I am a millennial. I grew up in the 1990s, and particularly during my middle school age, so specifically when I was in 6th grade, we read two books, Hatchet and Island of the Blue Dolphins. Now, the reason why these books in particular are what I'm going to go into today is that they're the two that really stuck out to me. But overall in the 1990s, there was this weird trend of the idea of survival as well as solitary survival. Growing up during that time period, we read books like these, where it was about a character who is dropped into a situation where there are no other people, just nada, for whatever reason, and their only goal is to survive. That's it, to survive. There's, of course, they hope to be rescued, but they don't necessarily expect to be rescued. And then, of course, for whatever reason, our schooling in the 90s was obsessed with teaching us about the Oregon Trail. It's a big part of millennial culture that we all played the Oregon Trail on at least I was old enough that we played them on the green DOS computers. That was a treat, let me tell you, y'all, with the floppy disks. Oh yeah, I played those original ones with our very high-tech computer lab, y'all. And it evolved from there. They kept making new versions of that game because people couldn't get enough of naming your friends the different people in the caravan and then watching them die of a rattlesnake bite or die of dysentery or whatever. Just absolute silliness. Nobody cared. When playing that game, nobody cared about actually trying to get to Oregon. They just wanted to have as much fun along the way as possible because 90% of the time, you did not win the game. Everybody died. It's a very difficult game, especially the old versions of it. But you just had a blast. And you always spent all your money on ammo so that you could do, the little hunting mode with the little pew pew, like Pong style pellets. Just hilarious. And just there were so many other books and there were so many other aspects of the 90s that just really fed into that like survivalist vibe that was going on. If, anybody is deep into sociology that has any context for why that became a thing, I would love to hear all about it. If you want to leave that in the comments below. I personally don't know why or how exactly we got to that point of thinking, oh yeah, this is it. This is the cool right here. But it was definitely a thing. And what I find so interesting about this is the fact that during such a developmental time in our lives, reading these books and playing these video games and just being inundated by this weird fascination with the Manifest Destiny, Oregon Trail, survivalist, all that stuff, to now, millennials are adults. I'm 36 years old. On average, millennials are somewhere between 30 and 40 years old. And we're starting homesteads. We're living in tiny homes. We're living nomadic lives. Our hobbies are like gardening and canning and knitting and just very like homey, homesteady, survivalist kind of things. And I know there's been discussion about why millennials choose these particular hobbies and lifestyles has a lot to do with our economic status that a lot of us are struggling. A lot of us are bogged down by student loan debt, other debts, and of course, who can forget the rising cost of living, the rising cost of housing, and the fact that wages are pretty much stagnant and have been stagnant for a long time. And on top of it, that the job market isn't so great and it's so hard to get a good job that pays decent. All of those factors definitely weigh in on why we have a fascination with these lifestyles and these particular hobbies. But I do feel like it does kind of harken back to in our childhood reading these solitary survivalist books and playing Oregon Trail. And then who can forget the Zeitgeist of Minecraft? That's a solitary survival game. You're completely all alone in a world where you can just build whatever you want and the goal is just to survive. And of course now we have realms, where you can play with other people. But the whole point of the game is pretty much just survival in a world where you're kind of the only person in it. And that, I feel like, is kind of like the stepping stone. We had the 90s where we had all of this literature and Oregon Trail and all that stuff. And then we moved to the 2000s with Minecraft, so that now we've carried that over as adults, and we're kind of doing that IRL with all of this different like homesteading and maker sort of hobbies. This video, like, it doesn't really have a neat and tidy rationale behind it because, again, I'm not a sociologist. I can't break down for y'all the who, what, where, and why of all of this, but I have kind of conglomerated these things together, just these, you know, shower thoughts, if you will. And I just find it fascinating because the thing is that millennial culture continues to baffle boomers and continues to baffle Gen Z. And honestly, a lot of us millennials are baffled by our own behavior as well, that it's a lot of times we kind of feel like, why are we here doing the things that we're doing? We feel compelled to do them and we enjoy doing them, but we don't always really know why we feel compelled to do them. Of course, the low-hanging fruit, as I said, is our economic station, unfortunate as it is. But I've also seen before people compare us to the Great Depression era, which I also find really interesting because, again, if there was ever an era of being a survivalist, it was definitely the Great Depression. And while so many people will argue that we're not in a recession, we're not in a depression, whatever your stance is on that, the fact of the matter is that the behavior is very similar, that we have a lot of people who are prepping for the worst, whatever their version of worst is, whether they're millennials canning food and having food gardens, or it's doomsday preppers having their basement bunkers and stuff, or it's people who are planning for the worst with nomadic lifestyles, believing that they're never going to have a true home or place to live, so they just make the best of it. There are so many different lifestyles that all kind of harken back to this idea of just doing the best with what you have. And so to kind of wrap up these shower thoughts on these 1990s survivalist stories, I think that like what's so fascinating for why these two particular books stuck out to me is that they are both very similar, but also very different in that they are both solitary survivalist stories. Both characters are completely and utterly alone from basically chapter 2 all the way up to the last chapter. Both of them have the people in their lives with them the very, very beginning of the story, and then at the very, very end of the story, they get rescued. And this is not spoilers. These books are very old, y'all. These books are very old, and the point of the story is the journey. The point of the story is not the ending. Like, I'm not spoiling anything by telling you that they end up getting rescued. It's whatever. Anyway, but where they really differ is the perspective. As I said in my previous video, Island of the Blue Dolphins is from the perspective of, she starts off as being about 14 years old. She's a girl and she is an islander, so she's an indigenous person. Whereas in Hatchet, the main character is a teenage white boy who comes from suburbia, essentially. And what happens to him is his parents are divorced and he's flying in this teeny tiny little plane with this pilot. So it's just him and the pilot in the plane. It's a very small plane to go and visit his dad. And during the flight, the pilot has a heart attack and the plane crashes into this lake. The pilot does not survive, but the boy does. And now he's in this picturesque wilderness, but he has to survive. There's no one else around. No one has any idea where he is. And there are no people for miles and miles and miles and miles. And so having the same sort of situation where all of her family leaves her behind, they all get on a boat and leave her behind on this island. He crashes a plane into a lake and he is all by his lonesome in this forest with no other people around. These are both very similar situations, but seeing them from these utterly different perspectives is so fascinating. And I think that that's what really stuck with me, is that you can be in such a similar situation and have such an utterly and completely different experience. With Island of the Blue Dolphins, she's an islander. She's an indigenous person. She knows how to fend for herself. She knows how to fish. She knows how to hunt. She knows how to make a fire. She knows how to take care of herself. She knows all of these skills. She's not super duper great at them starting off because first of all, she's only like 14 years old. Second of all, she had a whole village of people previously who would help her do these things. She was in the middle of learning these things and had people around to help her. So if she did a bad job at fishing that day, somebody would still bring her fish for dinner. Whereas now she's by herself. There's nobody else around to bring her fish for dinner if she doesn't fish for it herself. If she has a bad day at fishing, she's gonna go hungry. But in Hatchet, he doesn't really have any skills. Like, in fact, what's kind of funny is at the beginning of the story, the reason why it's called Hatchet is that one of the few possessions that he brings with him to go visit his dad is that, I think it was like for his birthday or Christmas or something, I don't really remember, it doesn't matter. He was gifted a small hatchet, which for those of y'all who are like, what's a hatchet? It's a small hand axe. So, you know, basically the thing on the cover of this book, that's what a hatchet is. And it's because of this gift that he's able to survive. This is like the only tool that he has. Everything else that was in his backpack is like completely wet and useless and just, you know, not anything that you need in the wilderness, like a Walkman, which way back in the 90s was kind of like an iPhone that you only play music on, and headphones. And that's kind of it. Like, that's the best example that I can give you for what that would be today. Once it runs out of batteries, it's useless anyway, but then on top of it, he crashed into a lake, so it's completely wet and destroyed. Can't do anything with that. And so, you know, he has this little axe that he's able to like chop up sticks with so that he can make a fire, and he can use to like hunt with, and to like, you know, make arrows and spears. He can use it to like sharpen, you know, stones and stuff like that. He can use it to hit stones in order to make sparks to start a fire. Like, this hatchet is basically his everything. And he has to just all of a sudden learn all these skills that he did not have. Like, there's this really funny scene in the middle of the book where he's so proud of himself, where he finally hunts his first bird. And it's like this small, like, sparrow thing. Like, it's nothing impressive. Like, it's barely going to be a mouthful, but he's so proud of himself. And then he takes it back into his little shelter that he made for himself. And then he's sitting there with it. And he's like, I don't know what to do now. Like, he's like, I don't know how to game dress this bird in order to cook it and eat it. And he makes the mistake of doing it inside of his little shelter. And for those of y'all that don't know what that means, it means plucking all the feathers off the bird and taking out all of the stuff inside, like all the organs and stuff. When you do that, you know what else comes out? All of the poop. So all of the organs and poop fell out of this dead bird, and then his shelter stunk to high heaven. He learned that lesson real fast about why you do game dressing far away from your shelter, because it smells bad. But just, you know, seeing him make these dumb mistakes and learning along the way, which when you're 12 and reading this, like, you know, it's very fun to laugh at him, like, haha, bird poop, whatever. But as an adult thinking back on this, you're like, oh wow. Like, dumb mistakes that he did could have technically cost him his life, because he's in the middle of nowhere. And on top of it, it's very important to note in the story, there are bears. He has to worry about bears. So the fact that he's game dressing a bird in his shelter like an idiot, he could attract bears to come attack him and destroy his shelter. So, you know, it has this kind of lining on it where you really stop and think like, oh no, this is actually really dangerous, and just really gives you that lens into, you know, oh, this isn't as idyllic as it was presented to us when, you know, we were 12, 13, 14 years old. Same with Island of the Blue Dolphins. I remember me and my girl classmates, we all loved this book, y'all. First of all, the fact that we had a strong, badass main character who was a girl, and she was like, yeah, I'm taking care of myself. I'm hunting these wild dogs. I'm so awesome. Da-da-da, was just everything. We were just like, yes, I want to be her. And we would all at recess play, you know, Island of the Blue Dolphins, like, I'm gonna go hunting and I'm gonna gather shells and blah blah blah, you know, like super duper pretend time, pretending we're little survivors on these pretend islands that we made up and stuff. And so it's just so funny seeing that contrast with, she knew what she was doing, she just had to really polish her skills, and the fact of having to do it by herself, that she didn't have her adults to, you know, be that community to help really teach her the right way to do it and to protect her when she messed up. Whereas this guy was kind of bumbling around and just screwing up all over the place and having to learn real fast from his mistakes. And again, I just feel like this really shaped a lot of the stuff that we as millennials do as adults now, with our obsession with homesteading and gardening and making things, whether it's canned goods or crocheting and knitting or, you know, woodworking, just all of that kind of stuff. And I just think that it's interesting to see that this might be a pinpoint along the way that caused us to be where we are now. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. And if you're new, subscribe. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.